First of all, necessary, I think there are counterexamples. So if you look at Norway and Iceland and New Zealand, these are rich countries with very enviable social systems and everything, but they're almost entirely dependent upon natural resources. But on the other hand, I think very few countries can do that. So I'm not 100% sure it's necessary, and I think it's fairly natural that countries will eventually industrialize. So I think what will change is, my hope, and this is very speculative looking forward, is what I sometimes call the third unbundling. So the first unbundling was goods move easily. Second unbundling was information moves easily. So we had offshoring. Now the third will be virtual reality. So there's two types of virtual reality, and this is not science fiction. It exists, but it's not cheap enough yet. So basically there's people-to-people virtual reality. So we could, for example, there are these conference centers where you could be in Peru and I could be in Geneva, and it would almost look like we were together, because they have many different cameras, they have many different microphones, very high bandwidth. So that reduces, it's not as good as being face-to-face, but then again, I wouldn't have had to spend a day and a half getting here and getting back. So it's, I think that will reduce the face-to-face, better communication technology. And the other is face-to-machine. So a lot of this, one of the troubles with Peru is that, let's suppose you have good infrastructure down here in Lima, you have reasonably priced labor, reasonably stable government. Why doesn't America move production here? And part of the reason is, if you have a factory here and something goes wrong, it's much harder for them to come from America to Peru to fix the machine than simply putting it in Mexico or Costa Rica or Colombia or something like that. So they're developing these robots which are remotely controlled, where you'd say, for example, leave the robot in the factory, and then the technician in Atlanta, Georgia, he would be driving it and fixing the machine remotely. And so people are starting to use this in hospitals in California, and of course drones are the ultimate example, where they're using remote machines. And I think when that gets going, when I think that really becomes widespread and reliable, then I think the global value chains will spread beyond factory North America and factory Asia to much wider. I think it is possible that the mining would create competencies in services which could be exploited elsewhere. So I think it would be very, very natural. But I would also caution a very naive moving up the value chain, because of two problems. Very, very frequently, the next chain in mining is extremely capital intensive and extremely high engineering intensive with very few jobs. So when you take out the mining and you do the processing and the refining and all that, it's a very fancy factory, but nobody works there. It's machines and high-tech engineers. So that's what they try and do in Saudi Arabia. So, oh, we'll refine it at home. But huge things and no jobs. And then they have to bring in foreign engineers anyways. So I think it's you have to be a little clever. What you're really trying to do here is create jobs, not grab value added. So what you want is to move into something, say, for example, services related to mining, which you can then use to export. And the second, or maybe it was the third point, is that in the old days, I mean, I'm talking about the 19th century, natural resources were the basis of industrialization. So in Germany and the United States, or in England, where you have coal and iron ore together, you got steel industry. But now that it's so cheap to move things around, the fuel, the ore, whatever, it's less of a basis of comparative advantage. So I would, I think it's a delicate thing, but it's certainly not it's not a bad idea altogether. And ultimately, I think these things need to get started somewhere. And then the question is, how do you manage it, and how do you expand your participation? And the real problem is to get it started. and then make sure it doesn't mess up. I mean, which happens very frequently. You know, the oil, Mexico in oil messed it up completely. I mean, they nationalized it. They only tried to do everything themselves, and then they just lost competitiveness. So.